We're going to go through a lot of issues at some pace, right the way from sort of, on the one hand, gene editing to the difference between Eastern and Western medicine and everything in between. So hopefully you'll come with me on the journey. I'll start off by introducing myself, which I forgot to do at the beginning of the conference. Who is this guy? So I wear two hats. One is CEO of B Advisory, which is a consultancy looking at how to create sustainable long-term value in a changing world. So that's why myself and Paul have been working so closely on this conference and others. But I also have another hat, which is the hat I'm going to be using to talk about the healthcare, which is co-founder of Vision for Health, which comes out of some work I'm going to share with you now about trying to get our heads around the long-term sustainability of healthcare and what in fact do we mean by health. So let's get cracking. So just to set the scenes in terms of some of the challenges in healthcare at 100,000 feet, we spend as an economy not far short of 10% of the entire GDP on healthcare. So it represents 20% of all government spend directly on healthcare. So it's a sizable chunk of the economy. And there are three main factors, there are a lot of other ones, but three main ones that are really causing this burden to rise probably around about 4% a year, depending on whose study you look at. One is the rise in chronic diseases. So unfortunately, we're getting more of them with more comorbidities, as they say, the sort of complications that come from the cryo-medical support. We've got an aging population, which we know about. So as people get older, they do tend to have long-term diseases that last longer, they need more care. And of course, there's ongoing medication and innovations in healthcare itself, which represent a burgeoning toolbox from which to prescribe from. So the overall trajectory is slow but relentless increasing costs, to the point if you roll this forward 10, 15 years, it's possible that healthcare could be 40% of government spend. So therefore there is if you like, a crisis of a meta kind in terms of how do we afford a sustainable public healthcare system. Now these long-term conditions aren't the only form of disease, but they're about 70% of the NHS's costs are associated with these chronic diseases, preventable lifestyle diseases. So there's a systemic challenge there to think about. So why do people get sick and ill, and is it fate, is it determined? Many studies done, this is one of them, which says that if you think about the cause of ill health and early mortality, why do people die before others? The quality of your healthcare is, of course, important, but it's by no means the most important. Genetics are important. They give you a predisposition, but again, not the most important. Environmental circumstances do make a difference. But by far the greatest reason that people get ill early and die earlier are socio-economic factors, the environments in which they inhabit. And in the UK, there's almost 20 years difference between the places in the UK with the highest and longest life expectancy and those with the least. That's not genetic, that's socio-economic. So if we're going to get a grip on the challenge of healthcare in the 21st century, it isn't just about the treatments we give people when they're sick, it's about addressing this bigger question. So there's a framing issue around here that's important. Now, that is the kind of problems, if you like, framed in one way, but we've got a whole bunch of new ones to get our heads around if we're going to think about how we frame solutions to the healthcare challenge moving forward. The first is that we do stand at the dawn of the greatest breakthroughs in science and medicine in human history. I'll go through a couple of what those are. But it's not a case, if we're going to address this, of taking the existing system in its current form and just reconfiguring that a little bit to be a bit more joined up. These new tools, new ways of understanding and getting at disease and the causes of disease are going to give everyone a brand new toolkit of vastly more power. So these need to be thought through in terms of what any systemic change may be. We want to sort of navigate to where the puck's going to be rather than where it is today. So this represents a big challenge that sits around that. Now if we look backwards for a moment, or even look eastwards, One of the ways that we used to frame health, and we still do if you look through maybe some of the sort of Vedic or Buddhist ways of looking at health. Health is about holistic harmony, mind, body, and spirit. The idea that there is a harmony within yourself, with others, and with the world. And if you can find that holistic harmony, it's more likely that you will live more healthily and well. And this is a kind of distinct wisdom that came out of the East before we understood anything about the complexities of how the body works. Now, of course, along came the scientific revolution, and along with that, the medical revolution. And what we've done is, through a process of reductionism, which is essentially what science is, get to the root cause of how things work, we've unpacked the body and broken it down into its constituent parts. We're doing the same job on the brain and the mind. And what we're creating is an explosion of fragments of knowledge about our health and our mental life, and knowledge about the environments that we inhabit and the ways that we live that impact our health. So this is fantastic. We're breaking apart, if you like, an understanding of these pieces. But one of the paradoxes, of course, is how do we put Humpty Dumpty together again? Because each of us get up in the morning and live a life as a whole person. And we've got this massive fragmentation and expansion of knowledge in bits, and lots of institutions that are forming around these bits. So healthcare is heavily fragmented. So the challenge is, how do we start to bring that together? In those who've studied your Hegel will know that we have a synthesis to undertake between the thesis, the holism, the antithesis, the scientific medicine that's given us all the insights of how the body works, but to join that back again in terms of whole person understanding of our health and well-being that we as citizens can take forward. So it's really one of the challenges as we frame this. Is this an opportunity with all this new technology that's going to get much more detailed and much more intimately ingrained in our everyday lives? Is there a possibility to rediscover the human and build this knowledge around a whole person frame of how we live and how we flourish, both as individuals and society? So one of the frames that we've been thinking about this is that if we're thinking about next generation healthcare, is it bootstrapping and all the existing silos to make them work faster? Or is it about having a meta frame that says all these pieces of the jigsaw need to come together around a frame that empowers human flourishing and well-being at the individual and societal level? So that raises the question then, what do we mean by health? What sits inside this frame? Is it just sickness, or is it something more? Now, interestingly, the World Health Organization has had a provocative crack at this, and they said, health is this state, or well-being is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of diseases or infirmity. So essentially, they're taking not a glass half empty, like you're not ill, therefore you're well, but there is a glass half full. Living well and flourishing under this definition means that you're less likely to get sick in the first place. And if you do get sick, then you can still live a meaningful life. So it's really an invitation for us to think about healthcare. It's not just clinical, but start to thinking about it as something much broader associated to well-being and flourishing. So if we're thinking about ecosystems of the future, what we really need to do is get a better grip and an understanding of what do we mean by human flourishing and well-being, and how do we mobilize a health ecosystem of the future to engage in that conversation in a much more joined up, integrated, systemic fashion. And that innovation and transformation is really a self-learning ecosystem better capable of supporting that for individuals and society. So that's a big picture provocation there. So how might we do that? If we sort of break that down, what does that mean in reality? So we were commissioned to do some work by the Royal Free Charity, who are associated with one of the big London hospitals, Royal Free, who basically recognised that as we stand at that dawn of the greatest changes in health and medicine, and that the system was being mobilised for more actors to come together, how does the healthcare system even start to navigate into those waters? There's so much change happening in so many areas. So they commissioned us essentially to do a piece of research to say, look at the mega trends in healthcare. We're going to live in a slightly different society. We understand how the body works in greater detail as a complex adaptive system. There's new forms of personalized medicine with our genomic sequencing and health and care is tailored to us, not just one size fits all. There's loads of new sensors coming along to measure all sorts of things about us, sensors in the body, on the body, around the body. All of this is going to generate tons of data, not just data because you went in to see your doctor and he asked you a few questions, but data streaming out of you and about you. In some ways, this is surveillance, but surveillance possibly for good, and we can perhaps debate that. And then psychology, how might we engage people in a different conversation about their own health? If we know more about what's going on in our body and how that relates to the decisions we're making, how might that inform individuals and inspire them to take more responsibility for certain aspects of their life and inform and engage how a healthcare system of the future, what's the conversation, what's included in that, in any future healthcare systems? We need to understand that. So we basically asked ourselves, what would health look like for the individual if all those trends had landed at scale? What could health look like, and what would this mean for a future healthcare system? Really a kind of meta-framing challenge to get into all the bits that are going to be evolving and developing. And the idea was, we wrote a report on this, Beyond the Fog, a vision for the long-term future. So if we can create something of what lies the other side, if once all these trends have landed, if we can create something of a vision of where things are going, then at least all the actors who hold pieces of the jigsaw have some sense of the picture that we may be building over the coming years. And then we feel that this is a really important piece of thinking that can enable and support the development of actors, not just only in the provision of healthcare, but we're talking about pharmaceutical and IT and wellness and a whole bunch of other industries who hold pieces of that overall puzzle. So, solution framing. This is the most complicated of the slides, but it's an attempt to try and understand, if you like, the landscape, the arena of health. And what we call it is like from cells to cities. So at the moment, if you're an individual, you possibly will go to the doctors because something feels wrong, you've got a pain or an ache, and there's a whole bunch of organ disease specialists who are there to treat you should you go into the healthcare system. But the research coming through now is showing, with greater understanding, what our genes are, how they communicate through the language of proteins, into molecular networks, how those inform and govern cellular networks, which then lead to the organ networks, which lead to the body. And what that is showing, that all the major diseases that we currently understand, as like cancer, dementia, chronic heart disease, all these major categories of disease that represent themselves in here, actually, most of them have their origin up here. So if we can understand the precursors to disease, and we can start to measure it, and we can start to create new interventions that affect here, either interventions maybe of a pharmaceutical type, or maybe interventions of a behavioral type, we can start to spot before people get significant disease what could be done to help people avoid disease. This is radically different. This is hacking disease in a fundamental way. It really calls for a different type of medicine and healthcare. I won't spend too much on these because I haven't got time, but there's the science of how we understand our health, how we make decisions in terms of what we eat, drink, and do. That is heavily informed by the social environments that we inhabit. So those are becoming better understood. How does that shape the actions that we take, which then drive our health? And these behavioral and social determinants sit within an environmental context as well. What opportunities are there to exercise, to eat well, etc., etc. So these really point to sort of policy makers and other actors who have a grip on different parts of the system. And our thesis is that if we're going to truly get on top of healthcare in the 21st century, we need to see health in that landscape and see it as a holistic meta-system, not just stay in the clinical frame. Now, the interesting thing about tomorrow is that there will be sensors in the body, on the body. There will be data pouring out from all of those environments. So we will have, for the first time, should we have the vision and the imagination to look broadly across that landscape and be able to pull data from it to advise not only individuals how they might more holistically support their own health, for those individuals to see that data and understand it themselves so they can be empowered to self-manage. But also, if you zoom out, to be able to understand where do different patterns of ill health and behaviors sit, and how do those correlate to the overall health outcomes of people. So we have evidence-driven policy, and also the ability to invite other actors to take their part in becoming a unified system, if you like, or an integrated ecosystem that can improve the health and well-being of the nation. So some big ideas there. All of that data, I told you this is going to get hairy now, all of that data can't just exist in a giant Excel spreadsheet, because that would be overwhelming to anyone. So you look sideways at industry, how they deal with complex data, which represents a complex adaptive system. They build a simulation. We have digital twins appearing, or the Met Office builds a simulation of health, of weather, so they can look backwards to see what data we get, what did we forecast, what actually happened, how do these models then become a simulation? So we expect what will come out of healthcare is not a flat record of your healthcare, but maybe a digital double, a digital twin of yourself that will be useful for driving understanding by healthcare professionals and the individual. And if you start to think about where the virtual assistant technology is going, whether, we've got versions of that with Alexa and Siri and things like that at the moment, imagine 10 to 15 years down the line, the possibility of taking that data and information and turning it into something that's informing and guiding of individuals of what this means, what they can do, and frame that in a coaching relationship. Writ large, we see, okay, there are many aspects of health, whether it be wellness, emotional risks, long-term conditions, and getting old, all these conversations and challenges of health and well-being that sensors and data will enable a digital health coach to participate and support people in their day-to-day well-being. Important, I think, because even if you have got a long-term condition, the stats out at the moment show that you spend less than 0.01% of your time with a healthcare professional, and over 99.99% of the time by yourself. Your healthcare professional doesn't go and follow in your life and tell you what to do. Technology can take the support and guidance and follow you and guide you in the moments and contexts. It's important. And having an underlying data infrastructure can drive a much more holistic healthcare system, which is not just provision of health, but other actors, whether it be research or food companies or others, that will have a shared insight of where the nature of the problems are and what they could do to contribute. This is really kind of bringing the economy together around health. Why do it? Well, if we looked at 4 chunks of where we can get a grip on this, one is pure prevention. If we can help people stay well and understand how to do that, we'll get less disease. If we can spot the earliest precursors to disease, there's another bite at the prevention cherry to head off disease before it gets a grip. We can provide people with more holistic support, as a single person, for more complex diseases and medicines rather than all the fragmented multiple ologists that exist today, and support people to be able to sustain independent living for longer. All of those things should bend the curve to the right, which really is talking about how we might provide people with longer, healthy life, writ large for the population. That starts to speak to the sustainability of healthcare and a better outcomes for people. So it raises, however, a bunch of big questions. What would need to be true for something like that? Now, these are the kind of questions at the moment that most health people in healthcare shy away from, because if you look at incremental strategy, some of these questions are so big that people go, ooh, let's go back to where we are now. But if, as we think we've done, show that there's a size of the prize that lies the other side of that, is so substantial and so exciting, these become innovation challenges to overcome, not reasons to shy back and go back to the silo and keep incrementally working from within that frame. So what are we doing? We intend to take this thinking as a provocation, hence Vision for Health, and creating a cross-sector steering group from people from different parts of the healthcare system to kind of bring a conversation together across these different industry silos around this future, exploring some joint initiatives, starting Vision for Health, and we've begun the process of really starting to get this thinking in the front of politicians, healthcare leaders and industry leaders to think about how can we think vision, future back, to frame where the opportunities and strategic collaborations might occur, as opposed to each individual silo doing their own thing. So I hope you found that interesting and inspiring. It's certainly been a great privilege to have worked on this and done a lot of the thinking, and it's still more to be done, and it's really an invitation to everyone here who've got thoughts and ideas on this, who are willing to be part of this, to come and support us in doing this. So it's my little plug at the end. So thank you very much. Right, I covered a lot of ground there, and I might have gone slightly over, so we'll probably do one or two quick questions if there is one. Yes. Oh, 3, 4. And then Nicola.
When the World Health Organization came that new definition, as you pointed out, the other thing it was doing, of course, was looking at the co-determinants of health, which lay outside the healthcare system itself. And you started off, I think, by saying quite a bit about that, particularly about issues such as inequality, but all those of the political, social, economic.
Yeah.
But let's just focus on inequality. If inequality is the main driver of problems in health, then surely it's that we should focus on, not the digital aspects or the individual aspects or the healthcare aspect specifically. We go back, we go broader, and we focus on the inequality. But of course that is a much more difficult issue.
It is, and so we've thought quite a lot about that, and there's still more thinking to be done, because you're right, the ill health tends to congregate in those areas of more inequalities. And there are definitely structural reasons why that happens, which isn't the individual's own fault that they find themselves in an environment where they may have very limited financial resources and less access to potential for healthy living. But our thoughts are that it's always going to be a mixture of individual agency and structural change. The two need to work in concert, because if you abandon the individual and leave them helpless to know what to do, and just make it structural, there is the need for each individual to undertake as much as they can of their own self-empowerment. And this thing about having a conversation with yourself, knowing stuff about yourself you didn't know before, that enables, even in more constrained environments, for some action to be taken to improve myself, and for that to be a motivation and inspiration to want to do more. And one of the things I didn't really have a chance to speak about that was it's not just the health information the digital health coach could play a role in. It's really starting to understand what might be the life coaching opportunities. Given where you live, what education opportunities might be important for you, what other things are around you that you might be interested in, whether it be job opportunities, what benefits and resources are you entitled to? Lots of people flounder around because they just can't get into the system to understand how they might even support themselves. So there's lots of ways that this could start to mobilize support around the needs of an individual, rather than the individual having to wrap themselves around all these impenetrable silos. And people in that class usually find themselves at the sharp end of not knowing how to engage what help is there. So can we bring that to them based on their individual needs? I think it's a really exciting opportunity to start to get a grip on that, although there are much more that needs to be done. Nick, I think just one question and then...
Thank you. It was absolutely excellent listening to you, and really visionary, and I think a lot of us have got a resounding yes to what you're speaking of. The question that I've got is similar to the previous one, in that I'm interested in what needs to be done to scale this. So we spoke earlier about short-term, long-term, and timeframes, and what, if you had your magic wand, single bullet, what would you do in order to make this de facto how things are done?
I didn't have a chance to show it here, but one of the things we did lay out is like a 3 steps from the highly fragmented to more collective, to more collaborative, to more unified ecosystem. There is a journey that the whole ecosystem needs to go on. And what the chief exec of the Royal Free, when we interviewed him, Sir David Sloan, said, you've got to think of this almost like a game of chess at multiple levels. Because there's a lot we could be doing in the provision area, but if the rules of the game and the incentives from which drives our priorities and behaviors are ones that embed the old model, then we're trying to break out of something that's trying to trap us within the institutional logic that we would not had there before. So in some ways, the politicians and the people who run the system need to be creating a vision, the framework, and incentives to kind of pull and encourage the actors to start to collaborate in this way. And we think our work is a way of sort of shining a light to give a sense of why that would be important, to provoke exactly those kind of conversations. Okay, that's me done. Thank you very much.